Significant cannabis law reform, particularly in America. We, of course, as we all know, we have the first 2 states to legalise. They're going to be joined by a few more, probably in a few months. We also, of course, have the first country to properly legalise, that being Uruguay, and another Southern Hemisphere country. And of course, as we all now know, post Uruguay's change, there were absolutely no repercussions for that country. No one invaded, no one cancelled free trade treaties, no one told them to stop. In fact, they said the opposite. This is a really interesting experiment. Can you teach us about it, please? So, you know, and this is, I think, why we're all here, right? We all know, everyone in this room knows this is a key moment, and it's time to just get on a common plan, and so that we can all move forward with some purpose. And so part of building that plan, of course, is of hearing about why we need to do it. And so our next 2 speakers will be giving us a bit of background about the war on drugs, prohibition in New Zealand and America and around the world. Our first speaker is Dr. Fiona Hutton, who is a senior lecturer at the Institute of Criminology at Victoria University here in Wellington. And I personally am very much looking forward to hearing from Fiona, and as I'm sure we all are. And I would like to welcome Fiona up to the microphone now. Thank you very much.
Right, now then, as you can see, I'm rather shorter than the other people, and I think that using the microphone is going to be a problem because I do like to move around a lot when I'm speaking.
Oh, well, we've got portable microphones there.
So, apologies for that. So just talk amongst yourselves while I get myself sorted. I do have to have my props and everything around me. Just double click on it, did you say?
It's already open. Here.
Oh,
Testing, there you go.
so I can just move through it with the arrows, can't I?
Yeah, let's see. Arrow forward, arrow back.
Yeah.
Arrow forward, back there. Give me 3 seconds, just need to look the I'm probably the most intrusive tech guy in the world.
No comment.
It's not even a fucking competition, is it? Sold!
Can I move this out of the way?
Yes, you can. Give me a moment, I'll do that for you.
Do some incidental music now. While it's all getting organised.
Oh, pirates, yes,
If anyone feels like having a bit of a sing-song, just carry on.
sold out to the CIA. Everything's better with a bag of weed. You don't need crack and you don't need speed, because everything's better with a bag of weed.
Right. More after these messages.
Now a word from our sponsor. Fidel Castro's son. Come on over. For a very long speech.
Oh.
Heart racing, kind of like, oh my god, I'm in front of people, I'm screwing people up, and I'm slowing it down.
That's alright. Well, I could have started now. I'm kind of a bit, I'm not really into the microphone business, as it said.
You have to hold a microphone on board.
It's going to really kind of stuff me up a bit, I think. I'm not very...
You need to hold it that close, right into it.
I'm not doing that, I'm sorry. Yeah.
Okay, so
I mean, I think I can make it so people can hear me, but I'm not really...
well, the thing is, it's not so much about whether people hear you, it's whether or not the audio recording devices get it all.
I know, but I'm not holding a microphone like this while I'm trying to give a thing. Sorry.
Okay.
I'm just not keen on that, really.
And you're just going to keep moving around?
Okay, that's fine then, that's good. Right, so we'll get that out of the way. Right, good heavens! You just wouldn't have had Katy Perry would have been easier maybe to manage, I think. Okay, so morning everybody. Sorry for the kind of technical hitches and the sort of delay. And I should also say that my PowerPoint has come out in a very bizarre sort of format here. So the information's still on there, so I think that's the most important thing. So you'll excuse if they suddenly turn upside down or do something weird.
Projector in front of you, you block the screen.
Oh,
Every
sorry,
time you move
okay.
slightly to that side.
So I'll move over here then to Phil instead.
You're welcome. Hi.
And you unfortunately also need to somehow move these slides and stuff. How do I do? Do you want me to do that for you?
That's all right. No,
You
that's
got it?
perfectly fine.
Just
Just let it flow, come on.
Go on, I need a cup of tea now and a lie down. Bloody hell, I haven't even got started yet. So yes, thank you very much, Phil, for the invitation to come and speak this morning. I think it's a very important topic that, like people have said, is sort of gathering a bit of momentum in New Zealand and globally. So I do want to try and look at prohibition this morning, which is, you know, the notion of prohibition has many problems, issues and debates within it. It's an area of enormous complexity and one that is often highly and emotionally contested. So added to this issue is that debates about drugs and drug policy also suffer from sensationalised and over-dramatic media coverage, meaning that there is a lot of misinformation about drugs, drug users and drug policy in New Zealand as well as in other countries. And when you have things like gender, ethnicity, class and so on that are added into the mix, this misinformation is intensified. And we can see here just a quote from Karen Muji about media sensationalising of issues around drugs. So we have, I can't actually read it from here with my eyesight, the media is seen to comprehensively misrepresent drugs, their effects, typical users, sellers, so on, leading to misinformation, which is intensified through media representation. So this is the first problem that we have in trying to have a reasonable, informed and balanced debate about drug use in New Zealand, as well as in other countries. We have the media as being problematic. Not always, but very often. And I think what we also need to think about prohibition, this thing called prohibition, is that it not only produces laws and regulations about drugs, it also produces and reinforces particular discourses about drug users. Not least because the substances you define as illegal drugs affects different groups as well as those whose behaviour is criminalised. So prohibition then, this thing that we're talking about and trying to get some reform around, has profound implications that affect many different groups of people. So it is not just about the law. So in the recent debates then in New Zealand around legal highs, or illegal highs I should say, and the issues surrounding drugs, drug policy and drug users, these arguments about prohibition and so on have once again come to the fore. But in the time available to me, I can just have a quick whistle-stop tour really through some of the key issues and debates surrounding prohibition. As well as a consideration for ways forward for reform, it is possible, several other countries and places have done it with very positive results, and whether indeed anybody will, come on PowerPoint, answer the phone, okay? So to begin with, prohibition, the driving force behind New Zealand's drug policy. I haven't got time to go into the long, convoluted, wide and varied arguments about prohibition, but Michael Shiner pretty much sums it up when he refers to the global failure of prohibition. And again, as Shiner states, prohibition may have largely failed as a crime control strategy, but it has been spectacularly successful as a political project, which is something that I'll come back to a bit later. So there's a general consensus then that prohibition has not stopped or reduced drug use, it hasn't stopped or reduced the harms from drug use, and that drugs offences relating to cannabis clog courts, criminal justice processes and take up too much of police time. But it is a political tool, tough on crime stance in general elections globally is often the rhetoric that politicians focus on. 2008, in talking about legal highs, when BZP was banned, was an election year, and 2014, when legal highs are now banned, is also an election year. So where did this thing called prohibition come from then? Well, events leading up to the 1975 Misuse of Drugs Act again have a sort of long, convoluted history, influenced by the Single Convention on Narcotic Drugs in 1961. So what kind of strikes you about these dates? 1975, 1961. A bit old now, perhaps? A bit outdated, maybe? Now, that's not to suggest that things over 40 are always useless, but, you know, perhaps we need to be thinking in more contemporary terms. The Misuse of Drugs Act is 39, the Single Convention is 53. And our beliefs from these periods have moved on quite substantially. So we look at the evidence for other substances, and we've moved on quite dramatically from our views about gender, well, sometimes, our views about tobacco. Here we have Santa advertising Chesterfield fags, my personal favourite. Let's face it, you could be hit by a bus tomorrow. Go on, have a fag. So we've moved on from outdated ideals about gender, about other drugs like tobacco. So why are we stuck in the past in our drug laws? Why are we hanging on to old-fashioned, outdated, arbitrary, illogical views about illicit drugs and illicit drug users? Well, is it because prohibition has been effective? Has it actually done anything? Well, let's have a look and see what prohibition has achieved so far. Has it stopped or reduced drug use, for example? Well, firstly, it has had some very significant and far-reaching effects, or side effects as I like to refer to them, or perhaps not those kinds of side effects that we would like to see. So first of all, 1972, Nixon launches the drug war. What happens to the prison population? Skyrockets, okay, as you can see from that there. So one of the side effects of prohibition is a burgeoning prison population. Also, a bit more sinister, if you can actually get anything that's more sinister than that, drug policy and racism. So the idea that particular ethnic groups suffer more under prohibition. Okay, this is American research. African Americans are arrested on drug charges rate 2.8 to 5.5 times higher than white Americans. And we can also see in the UK, black people use less drugs than white people, but are 6 times more likely to be stopped and searched for drugs by the police. New Zealand, sadly, is no exception to this, despite Maori making up, excuse me, 15% of the population. We have a disparity in those young people as well who are convicted for possession and or use of a utensil and so on. So, as the report by the Beckley Foundation, their Global Cannabis Commission in 2008 also notes, the high degree of discretion around cannabis given to police and prosecutors can lead to discriminatory approaches to arrest and punishment, and can facilitate the harassment and exclusion of minority groups by ethnicity, class, and so on. So prohibition has had some dramatic effects on some social and criminological issues. But in terms of drug use, it's perhaps worth noting some of these quotes. and half of them are also missing off the PowerPoint. This is going to be interesting. So, as Fastia noted, way back in the mist of time in 1998, making some form of misbehaviour a crime does not ensure that it will be stamped out by the forces of the law. Echoing unconsciously the words of liberal politicians in the 1900s when talking about youth smoking, you cannot make people virtuous by legislation. If only it was that simple. The New Zealand Expert Advisory Committee on Drugs also noted there is no guarantee that scheduling a substance reduces the availability or potential risk of harm from a drug. And this would appear to be borne out in the data about drug use in New Zealand, which is rising. We do have quite large numbers of New Zealanders who use cannabis, and other drugs like ecstasy, methamphetamine are much smaller. So we have quite small numbers, but they are on the rise. I wonder if I have that on a PowerPoint. So here we have nearly 50% of New Zealanders across that enormous age span had lifetime use of any drug, and 46.4% had lifetime use of cannabis. That's like 1.2 million people. And, you know, nearly 500,000 had used a drug in the past year, and that's mostly cannabis. Again, as the Beckley Foundation notes, around about 80% of illicit drug users globally are cannabis users. So, prohibition and deterrence then have not really worked in New Zealand so far, nor in the rest of the world. This is possibly slightly hard for you to read. So we have United Nations estimates of annual drug consumption. Opiates increase, cocaine increase, cannabis increase. So decades and decades of prohibition, billions of dollars of money spent, and what's happened? Well, drug use has risen, basically. That's what's happened. Prisons are overflowing with prisoners, usually high percentage of ethnic minorities. So what have we achieved with prohibition? So does it reduce the harms from drug use then? Which is often cited as a sort of key aim of drug policies and so on. So New Zealand's drug policy in fact states that one of its aims is to reduce harm. The Psychoactive Substances Act 2013, only young people with super eyesight will be able to read this, states that it wants to minimise the harm to individuals who are using psychoactive substances. I'm just going to use your desk, Phil, sorry.